what are we doing wrong here? This is an incredibly common SQL mistake, and I saw a lot of my computer science majors making this mistake while I was teaching computer science. Let's look at some basic SQL questions you might get asked during a job interview or a test. If you're answering SQL test questions, then they normally give you a small database to base your answers on. There are usually two database tables, because then they can ask you to do table joins. In this example, we'll be using the customers and products tables in the SQL Server Northwind sample database. If you want to practice basic to intermediate SQL, then this is well worth installing. There's a link in the description below to my video showing you how to install the Northwind database. The products table is a good table to practice on because it has a mixture of text and numerical columns, so it's a great one for practicing questions on ordering and sorting. Let's look at some queries with the products table. Okay, so here are the products. In SQL interviews, it's incredibly common to be asked how to find the minimum or maximum value in a database table. So let's look at this. So to find the maximum price, we can use max. That's 263.5. And the min price is 2.5. This is using the unit price column. Note that when we run the query, there is no column name here, so it's always best to use column aliases. So you can use as and then put the column name here. This will also work, but I tend to use single quotes around my column names. That means you can put spaces in. Remember to read the question very carefully. As you can see, we've written a query to return the maximum or the minimum price. What they'll probably ask you to do is to return the most expensive or the least expensive product. So for this we can use top, select top, and we used select top 1 to return the most or the least expensive. So this one gives us the most expensive. All we have to do is to order by unit price and desk. That means in descending order, so the most expensive ones will come out first. And if we leave out desk, we get the cheapest product. We can also write ASC here for ascending. That starts with the lowest one. More experienced developers know you can always leave it out here because ascending is the default order. Another thing to be wary of is that here we are returning star, so to select top 1 star. This will return all of the columns. They may ask you for just specific columns, in which case you can replace the star with the individual column names. So here we just get product ID and product name. They probably want the unit price as well, so we can put that here. Again, be very careful and read the question if they name specific columns they want returned. I should just mention that top may be a trick question occasionally because top is only for SQL Server. It won't work with other databases. If you want to do the same query in MySQL, then you use limit. So it won't actually work in this database, but we put limit 0, that means the first record, and 1 is the number of records. So this one will just return 1 record. Now we'll look at some where clauses. It's almost certain you'll get asked some questions where you'll have to use a where clause to answer it. So here are 3 where clauses. They may ask you to return something where the column value is exactly the value they specify, in which case you can just use equals. Then we can use greater than, so this is any product that's greater than 50. And here's one where the product price is greater than or equal to 50. Obviously we can do less than as well. The key thing here is to not get mixed up between greater than or greater than equal to. So again, read the question very, very carefully. So what do you do if you are asked a question like this, where you have to return products whose price is between a lower and upper limit? So we can use the greater than or less than and use an and clause here. So this will work. The key word here is inclusive. If you see this, then that means you have to include products where the price is 30 and also the price is 36. So Just look out for this word. If they don't include it, then it can be quite ambiguous. Instead of using the AND operator, we can use the between function. This one here returns 9 rows, and this one here also returns 9 rows. This second one is much more elegant, so try to use a between keyword for queries like this. The key thing with between is that it is inclusive by default, so if you put 30 here, then it will include products whose unit price is 30, like this one here. And 36, this one is here. Just be aware as well that they may want you to order the results as well. As you can see, these come out in a random order because that's what they're like in the database. I think this one's coming out in product order. Yeah. I'll briefly mention table joins. It's very likely you'll be given one of these, especially if they give you 2 tables. So let's have a look at a very basic table join. So here we are joining the products to the suppliers table. This is a very typical table join. So if we look at the products, here we have a supplier ID, which is a number, and this is linked to the suppliers table. We'll look at this one here. And supplier ID and the company name here. So they'll often ask you to list the products and also list the company name. So this type of table join is the one that you have to practice. You'll almost certainly get asked this kind of query. Again, read the question carefully. Here I've returned all of the columns, but they may ask you to return specific columns. So what problems could there be with a table join? I've just mentioned that you can use table aliases when you're writing table joins. I'm not a huge fan of these, but many interviewers will expect you to use them. One of the biggest mistakes I've seen when people do paper-based exams on SQL is that they put the where clause above the join. So they do something like this. Obviously, if you're doing a computer-based test, then you'll soon know that this won't work because this is in the wrong place. If you're doing a paper-based test, then it is very, very easy to get the order of the clauses in the wrong order. So this is something to double check when you're writing your answers. Most interview questions are normally concerned with numerical values. However, they may ask you 1 or 2 questions about text values. So finding a specific product based on its name would be a typical query. Let's do this now. So you can use equals to find a product with a specific name. You can also do pattern matching using the % sign. And remember that the pattern matching uses the % sign and not the star as you would in other systems like Windows Search. So just remember it is the % sign. They might ask you what that pattern matching is. I would say that at basic level SQL they would only ask you for the % sign. If you put it at the start, then it will match the middle of a word or column. Let's do Anton. I don't think they would ask you for the other pattern matching, like matching single letters. Questions using Boolean logic and or not would be very common. Usually and or is sufficient at this level, so make sure you can write these. So here's a couple of them. The key thing here is to remember whether to use and or. When I was teaching database programming, one of the most common errors I saw is that people were writing this. So remember that you can't write this. You have to write it like this, and you have to put the column name in on every clause here. So this one won't work. This is incredibly common, so make sure that you don't write this. So while this is okay, just be aware that it's a bad idea to write something like this. I saw a lot of my students were writing a long query like this. With programming, we're always trying to be as efficient as possible and trying to write as little code as possible. So instead of writing this long line, we can use the in clause. So that means we simply have to write this. So if you get a question when they ask you to return specific products or something, then always use in. You can also use it with strings. Remember to put single quotes around them if you're using strings. When doing SQL queries, they might try to trick you with null values in database tables. To investigate those, we'll have to look at the customers table. In this table, we notice that there are null values for the region and also the facts. So I'll move this up a bit, and here you'll notice that there are quite a few values that are missing and have null values in the facts column. Nulls can be quite tricky to look at, so let's look at some scenarios that they might try to ask you. The first thing they might ask you is to return a list of rows with null values. So can you write this, select star from customers where facts, this column here, equals null. You might be a bit mystified if you write this because clearly there are values that are null in here. So why doesn't this work? Remember, when you're returning nulls, you have to use is null. You can't use an equals for null. So now we've got 22 rows, so this is all of the rows that have a null value for the facts. So if they're asking you, find the values that are not null, so you can't use this as you might do in JavaScript or something else. You have to use is not null. So now we have 69 rows and all the null values are gone. So this is the other query that they might ask you. Remember that null values can influence the counting if they ask you to use the count operator. We'll learn more about that later. Let's look at some general counting where nulls are not involved. So counting can be quite tricky, so you have to read the question carefully. It's important to distinguish between questions where they just want you to return specific rows or questions where they want you to return the count of specific rows. So if we find all of the customers who live in London, this is this query. So there are 6 of them. So they might just ask us to return the number of customers who live in London, in which case we can use count star. And there are 6 customers. Just be careful because one of them has a null value here for facts. If you notice there are null values in the database, as there are with this query, then it's normally better to use count star if you're counting the rows. You can use this if they don't ask you to put a where clause in. So we have 91 customers in this database. Just be aware that you can't use the count operator on null values. So if we count the facts column, we only get 69 customers. That's because there are only 69 customers who have a value in the facts column. The other customers have a null value for the facts number. We can't actually use this either where facts is null. That won't work either. There clearly are ones when the facts is null, but you cannot count using the null clause. The correct way to do this is to use count star and then put in a where clause. So count star with no where clause will return all of the rows. So there's 91 rows. So to find the ones that have a null value for facts, we can use this one. So we count star to count all the columns with that specific where clause. And there are 22 of those and 69, which means 91 in total if we do both of these queries. So remember to use count star and then put a where clause in if null values are involved. Remember, as with any exam or test, the key thing is to read the question carefully, really carefully. If you're doing a computer-based test, then remember to actually run your queries and make sure they work. I was actually teaching students and lots of them didn't actually do this. Again, if you're writing the test on paper and you don't have access to a computer, the key thing here is to make sure that you get the order of things right. So make sure that you put the where clause below the inner join and not above it like here. This is an incredibly easy mistake to make. If you want me to cover any other SQL topics, then drop a comment below and I'll see what I can do. Thanks for watching.